we've seen the blockade, the US blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, and we've seen this situation for weeks now where there seems to be these back and forth negotiations between the Trump administration and the Iranian government, or what's left of the Iranian government.
Yeah.
And so what I'd like to ask you is, there are a lot of people who seem to be of the opinion, well, maybe this is ineffective, we've got to go back to fighting. There are others who say, no, we need to reach a deal. There are others who say maybe having this blockade and sort of starving the regime of their resources is the right move. So I'd like to know, in your opinion, based on your military understanding and expertise, does this seem like the right strategy at the moment?
Yeah, so currently where we are is that the U.S. Gave the American administration, provided the Iranian regime with a proposal for a deal that would bring a ceasefire and a possible long-term ceasefire and an actual end to the war. It included, the first condition was no enrichment on Iranian soil, and that all of the previously enriched uranium up to military level, which the Iranians did in violation of international agreements, that all of the enriched material be extracted safely from Iran, and that Iran commits to not trying to develop nuclear weapons and to a strict system of international inspections and to open the Strait of Hormuz. Those were the core conditions, which from my perspective, from an Israeli perspective, is far less than what's really necessary. But this was the American proposal. The Iranians got that about a week ago. They thought about it, and yesterday they returned an official answer, which was basically no, that they're not going to agree not to pursue nuclear weapons. And that should tell everybody around the world, those are for freedom and those are who are against freedom, where the Iranian regime really stands. They stand and they want to prioritize enrichment in order to develop nuclear weapons. That is what it boils down to. And they've been, their communications from official sources in Iran have been very belligerent and enticing, really insulting to President Trump, but specifically kind of warmongering. And it appears that the Iranians, the people who are currently in power in Iran, which is mostly a group of IRGC generals that appear to be making decisions, they're taking the Iranian regime on a very, it's a lot of brinkmanship, it's not very smart diplomacy, and they're making dangerous decisions. But what they've said basically to the US through the Pakistani negotiators is no, we're not going to agree to a deal. So at this time, where we are now is a fork in the road. We may very likely go back to kinetic operations, to violence, go back to active hostilities, because there's no active negotiations, and the Iranians said no. And depending on what President Trump and his team decides, we may continue to extend the ceasefire for whatever obscure reason, which I wouldn't be able to comprehend why. And currently, what we have on the ground from a military perspective is that all of the tools are there. The U.S. forces are still deployed in the area. Actually, more forces, more capabilities in terms of air power, intel, logistics, naval power have been arriving in the region of the Arabian Gulf and the Middle East during the ceasefire. So there's more military capabilities at hand. And what's happening every day is through the quite effective American blockade on Iranian ports. We have a situation whereby the Iranian regime loses at least, and these are conservative assessments, at least $500 million every day in revenue lost, since they're not able to sell oil in violation of sanctions, but nevertheless sell oil as they used to do before the war started. And that is money that the Iranian regime doesn't have. And there are quite a lot of difficulties now for the Iranian regime. Thanks to the American blockade, they cannot export, they cannot import any big items of bulk that would be transferred by sea. The Iranian economy absolutely relies something to the tune of 85 to 90% on oil exports and petrochemicals. Since that is prevented by the American blockade, the Iranian regime has a serious issue of access to international funds. Another interesting point that finally happened: after relentless, unprecedented Iranian attacks against the United Arab Emirates, a Muslim neighboring country, a small country just on the other side of the Persian Gulf, a few hundred miles or kilometers away from Iran, that country has been targeted by Iran more than any other country, more than Israel, more than US bases. The Iranian regime has struck the UAE with thousands of drones and missiles. And what the Emiratis finally did was to use what probably is their doomsday weapon against the Iranians, and that is to freeze several dozen billions of dollars of Iranian money that was active in Emirati financial institutions, because the Emiratis were basically a financial hub for the Iranians to access the global markets. Again, in violation of international sanctions, and I think the Emiratis shouldn't have been doing it to begin with. They were, which is unfortunate, but now the Emiratis have retaliated against Iranian military aggression by freezing their funds, which is interesting and is very meaningful, because the Iranian regime doesn't really have any foreign currency reserves left, and they're very limited in their ability to access markets. They are now unable to export oil, so there's no money coming in. And every day that goes by, as you alluded to in the beginning, yes, people around the world are feeling the discomfort of gas prices going up, and I think there are still a few more effects that we will face, but the discomfort or the suffering that the Iranian regime is going through is far, far greater. There's no comparison. And here's why it's so absurd. What people around the world who are not into the details, what they're seeing in the media is that Iran, there's a lot of bluster, there's a lot of bravado, lots of macho messaging coming out of, a lot of hard talk coming out of Iran, but in reality, they're suffering, and every day that goes by brings them closer to economic collapse. So what I think needs to be done is to maintain and enhance the economic pressure on the regime, to get ready to use military force again, to communicate to the Iranian regime that this is now your last chance. You said no to a very reasonable deal that President Trump laid forward through the Pakistani negotiators. We'll give you 48 hours, and then we're going to resume military activity. Now, an important other part for people really to understand what this Iranian regime is and actually how out of bounds they are. Not only have they strangled the Hormuz Strait, which is the cause of the spike in oil prices and everything that we're dealing with. Not only have they violated international law of free shipping and free passage, something that is sacred around the world. There are many straits like the Hormuz Strait where neighboring countries could, if there wasn't respect for international law, they could do the same things that Iran is doing today. There's the Malacca Straits in Singapore. There's the Suez Canal. There's Gibraltar. There's Panama. There are many other locations where there's vast volume of international shipping, where there are countries who could inflict damage on it. But that's not done because of international law and how that is respected. The Iranian regime has shown its disrespect for that, but they're also taking it one step further. Not only have they stopped international maritime shipping, nothing to do with Iran, nothing to do with the war. Indian, Chinese, Japanese, European, Qatari, all of those vessels who are not part of the fighting have been stopped by the Iranians, and that's old news. What the Iranian regime is insinuating now is that they also want to take control over underwater information and communication cables. And they actually issued official statements by the official Iranian news agency, IRNA, a few days ago, where they provided an infographic showing here's where the cables are. This is where a lot of the seabed cables, international high-speed, high-volume communication cables are. And what the Iranian regime feels entitled to do is to take control over these cables and to tax countries and institutions around the world, financial institutions, who rely on the information that is provided in these cables, and even more important, to force those institutions to comply with Iranian law, which is absurd, which is a nation going rogue. It's some military junta regime that is just crazy, making crazy statements. But the thing is that they may think that they're entitled to do so, and they may actually try. The only good thing is that the Iranian Navy hasn't been seen since, for a few weeks ago when the American forces in CENTCOM destroyed most of it. So they may have submarines left, a few of them. They may be able to do some damage, but, in terms of a sustained campaign against international communications would be difficult for them. But it really tells you what the Iranian regime is about, and actually how desperate and lawless and unhinged that regime is.